gentlemen, their family, that has their uncles and grandfathers buried there. So because of that, there was a lot of hard feelings and tensions that came up and that were raised by that happening and not within the family beforehand. So we just wanted to go ahead and have a meeting here today, and Francis was kind and offered to come here and just show whatever his findings were whenever he was doing the survey of that area. And then we wanted to go ahead and open it up to any elders and family members that have stories and knowledge about the family that lived there in that area, things that went on. And we're not associated with the library or anything, so we don't really have any say over what's going to happen. But we just wanted to open it up so that people can be informed about what happened, and then you can go on and to continue whatever it is that you guys decide you want to do. So that's the main thing. So I don't know if we want to start with Francis' presentation first, or you want to open it up. Whenever, go ahead, you can say some words first.
Thank you much. So I want to introduce you to Minerva White. Minerva White is a knowledge keeper within the community. Anything I need to find out, whether it's for education or land or anything that goes back to whatever Minerva can remember, or her mother told her, or her father, or her grandparents, I always go to Minerva. She's accurate in what she says. She remembers quite a lot. I think she's a real asset to this community. So I just let Minerva start off.
Oh, okay. And by the way, what's your name?
Where's Wood?
Who are you?
Yeah.
I recognize you got a haircut.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I just came because I thought I would give a little bit of history about why there is a cemetery there. The land, the original owner, as I know, was a man by the name of Charles White. And he owned that farm. I believe Scott McDonald owns it now.
Yes.
The state came, this is the story now from my grandfather around. The state came and asked if they could build a district school there. And he said he would think about it. And later on they came back and he said yes. He said, providing that we can use the building on Wednesday nights for prayer meeting and on Sundays for church. So this, I tried to get the exact date, but I can't. I don't know if it's in the state archives or the tribe doesn't have those records because they didn't keep good records back then. So that's what happened. And so whenever you have a church, that's what it was on Wednesday, and you have a membership, so you baptize and then you bury people. So the story that was brought from handed down to us is that there were not only Peter Moran. By the way, he was always a Moran, and he went to Carlisle, and when he came back, he changed his name then to Moran. So there were people there that belonged to that church school who died, and as far as I knew, before Peter, there were 5 burials. I don't know how many you found. There were 5. And that the majority of them were children. And that children, they didn't have the kind of health services that we have now. So a lot of them died when they were young or at birth. And then there is a veteran. I knew that there was a veteran there. I didn't know. They weren't too sure what war it was. This was my grandparents. I don't know
Scott McDonald.
about any land transaction because her grandfather bought the school. I don't know who bought it. If he, because he converted the building, the school building into their home. I think that's where Valerie Garland home is now. Anything else? Is there anything that,
Well, you think there's more graves there because it was a church?
pardon?
Do you think there's a lot more graves?
I can't hear.
I think there's a lot more graves there because it was a church.
Yes, I do.
So there's more than
I
just
don't
one
know how
found.
many, but I knew of 5.
So there's more than what was
I
found.
know of, that's what I heard, okay, that came, was handed
Yeah.
down to us. There were 5 people buried there, besides Peter, Moran, and the veteran. So, I don't know if that coincides with what you found. And that they were children, mostly children.
Whose children were they?
We don't know. I don't know, they didn't know. Whoever went to church there, it was a Protestant church. Because the Catholic Church was in St. Bridget's, and that was an earlier, that was an earlier.
We always heard that it was my mother's brothers and sisters that were buried there. They didn't make it. We always,
Brothers.
We heard it was his mother's
Oh.
brothers and sisters that were buried there. Those are the Victory boys.
Yeah, I know that.
Ines is,
her brothers were buried there.
I don't know that, but all I know is what was told to me by John Moran. And that story was handed down. I don't remember John Moran that well because I was very young then. But my grandmother and my mother certainly knew the story. I don't know who would be buried.
well, John married twice, didn't he? There was like half sisters there. John,
John?
he had 2 wives and 2 different
Yeah.
sets of children, right?
I don't know. I don't know about that. You would.
Because Christy Garland, she was my Pete's half sister.
Yeah, that was my mother.
Yeah.
My grandma said the same thing also, that my mom remembers too, is that, because she was good friends with their mother,
Yeah.
Inez, and she said that in their family, a lot of babies died, and she remembered them being buried in that area.
There's a lot of miscarriages, and the nearest hospital was Ogdensburg.
Yeah, they didn't have the kind of.
Yeah, it's horse and buggy.
services we have now.
Bad luck on the road.
So I guess now would be a little time, we can go ahead and start with your presentation. I'm gonna get a couple more chairs for just in case a few more people come.
First of all, thank you for sharing that with us. I think that's very important.
What I know.
Come on in, come on in. Yeah, I want to give others a chance before I start, because I don't want this to become a lecture. I didn't come here to tell everyone, this is what we do kind of thing. I'd rather hear from people within the community before I even start, and then share with you some of our findings, what we do in the community. As you know, some of you are aware of some of the work we do, some of you are not. So I'm going to run under the assumption that people aren't aware and just kind of give you some of the ins and outs. But anyone else want to add something before I share some thoughts, concerns? I mean, this is a good time to do it, Or around neutral territory, if you want to call it that. And this is a great opportunity for you to share these thoughts.
Can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I will. I will do all that. I just want to give everybody a chance to settle in. And I want to also thank Levi for suggesting this location. We thought, it'd be good if we do it here, because that way it's a bit of a neutral territory. Both longhouses can be invited over to attend. Okay? So I'll start. You'll also be given a chance at the end, once again, to sort of share your thoughts, because it's very, very important. It's most unfortunate that we're meeting in this scenario. We haven't done any presentations for the Longhouse in over a decade, and it's on our to-do list of places to go and present. And I know that a lot of times people use the pandemic as the excuse why we haven't been doing that. But I think now we're at a point where it's time to get things started again. For those of you that are not familiar with myself, I'll introduce myself and share a little bit about what I do in the community. I'm Francis Gardera, Francesco. I've been working in the community doing archaeology for over 20 years. The late Sally Benedict and PG at the time was our, what they call TIPO, Tribal Historic Preservation Officer. I know it's a long word. Sue Hearn at the time was director at the library and the cultural center. And they asked me at the time, they needed help. There's a lot of activity going on in the community and no archaeology is being done. And they were very, very concerned about sites being destroyed, cemeteries that are unmarked, that kind of thing. And so for the last 20 years, I've been trying to help the community with that. And as a promise to the late Sally Benedict, that we would only hire people within the community to do the work. So when you see us in the field, everybody in that field is from Akwesasne. All of our screens are built in Akwesasne. How's that? So we even got the woodworking program to help us build the screens. And so we're trying to do everything in-house. The only thing we send out would be like our radiocarbon dates. Sometimes we bring in specialists, like for ground penetrating radar. You want the latest equipment to do the kind of testing that we need. And so that's the only thing that we really outsource. Everything else is in-house. And you know what, as technology gets cheaper, we're going to be doing more of that even ourselves here. Okay? Keeping up has not been easy. It's been very, very difficult because there's just so much happening. This community is growing at a fast rate. And so I'll go through a little bit of that. But today I want to focus on the cemetery site and not talk about all the other archaeology. If I do, it's just as a comparison, not because I want to move away from the key topic of discussion. People often ask in terms of designation and just to share, they have me down as doctor, but I'm an RPA. The difference is the following. Your PhD is generally to teach in university. Your RPA is to be a field person. So the PhD shouldn't be running a field school or excavate. And the way you acquire that, and if ever you need to verify yourself, okay? Because 20 years ago there was a problem. A lot of people were claiming to be archaeologists. And so they came up with a standard. And the standard is you need to have at least the equivalent of 2 years minimum. But 2 years doesn't mean this summer and next summer. It means 365 days. So here in the Northeast, because our summers are very short, our field schools, it takes the average person 5 to 10 years to acquire to be a registered archaeologist. And if you go to the Registry of Professional Archaeologists, if ever you're in doubt, there you'll see people listed, and then you'll know. They're also very specific as to the regions. So even though I'm a registered archaeologist, I can't go to Egypt and do archaeology there. My specialty is the Northeast, and so that's the area I have to concentrate on. Okay, so that's been brought in to protect, especially indigenous nations, from having people come in, and there's been a lot of that here, by the way. I'm sure you've heard of the Gogo collection. Gogo was a retired military officer who lived in Summers Town, and he used to go around Akwesasne collecting artifacts. There's a collection at the museum of what's now called the Museum of History in Ottawa that has about 150,000 artifacts that this individual took from the community. Okay? The only silver lining in the story is that we now know where a lot of these sites are. And Akwesasne is filled with archaeological sites. It's a good thing, but it's also a problem when it comes to development. Okay? And I'll explain to you why that is. I'll share some examples. By the way, the reason I had it listed as Phillips Lorraine is just for our paperwork. This is the oldest one that we have in terms of a headstone. Okay, so whenever we're trying to document these cemeteries, people will ask, well, what's the oldest one there, or you think might be the oldest? That we're sure of. So there's a Phillips buried in 1890, of course. Lorraine gap. It's hard to say why, but we're gonna try and work backwards with the history, okay? Usually, we don't do things in this order, you know, in the sense that we have, even in New York State, there's 3 stages. On the Canadian side, 4 stages of archaeology. Stage 1 is where you collect all your information. In other words, this meeting would have been done before, okay? And generally speaking, that's what you want to do, is you want to always start with your stage 1, where you get all your background information, meet with people in the community, give them a chance to share their stories, and then you move on to a stage 2 if everybody's in agreement, where you do your survey. Try and use non-intrusive methods, in other words, without having to excavate if possible. And then if there are areas that do need some testing, then you would do that as well. Okay? And the stage 3 generally is when you do a full excavation, if you have to remove something. So if they widened, I mean, it's not going to happen, but imagine a scenario where they widened 37 routes, 37 again, and they made it to a 4-lane. That would be a problem. And then they'd have to make a decision. Either they don't do it, or they would have to move a cemetery, which is never, ever recommended. We've always been on the side of no excavation when it comes to burials. You know, unless there's an absolute reason to do it, and generally there aren't. The goal is always protect. Same thing with the archaeology we do. We try and get there ahead of time, making sure whether or not there are things that need protection. You know, the first project I ever worked on in the community was when they opened the casino. They were looking for their parking space, and so we surveyed the parking area, a large area, and we told them, well, you know, we didn't find anything, but there were butternut trees along the most northern edge, and what they did is they reshaped their parking lots to avoid the butternut trees. Okay, so that's the kind of thing we do. We're very careful with the word sacred, for example. So those butternut trees, when it came out to social media, all of a sudden they became sacred trees. And I'm very careful with that word. Unless we can prove beyond the reasonable doubt that it's a sacred site, then, you know, and that's not for me to decide as well. You know, we present what we find. We try and stay away from that word, because if you start calling everything sacred, you know, you have to be very careful with that, the use of that term. So we are, okay? So in case you see this order, this is not an official name just for our paperwork. It would probably come back to the community and say, well, what should we call this officially? And you'll hear me say officially a lot, because one of the problems is that we have a lot of cemeteries like this in the community where they're not really documented. And so my concern is 57 generations ahead, as we keep changing property owners, guess what? They get forgotten, they get buried again. And the library now is the custodian of the cemetery. Well, guess what? They didn't think, they thought there was one headstone. They never realized that, well, they had plots equivalent to the cemetery. Now, I know somewhere somebody should have, whether, you know, at this point, finger pointing, whether it's a surveyor, whether it's St. Regis Mohawk tribe. I mean, we can go on and back in time, but I think the key thing now is, how do we protect this site? Okay, what do we have there? So these are your 2 headstones there. So Phillips is the one that's laying flat, and Lorraine is the one that obviously that most people see from the road. But there are, and we think there are probably more of those flat stones that are on the ground and got buried over based on our study. Yeah, so I mentioned everybody that works for us is from the community, and we've been running field schools as well to train people. The university credit, and then this year we're trying to start one for high school students as well. And the high school students, what we would like to do is get them to use some of this technology for identifying where some of these burials are. The one we really want to work on is the St. Regis Church, where next to the pastor's house, there used to be a garden. We think the original longhouse, because the original church was in the form of a longhouse, we'd like to relocate this longhouse and use that for our high school student program. On the Ontario side, you can now get a high school credit, summer credit, for doing archaeology. So imagine that, you have a choice. You can do 4 weeks in school, or spend 4 weeks with us in the field and contribute to the knowledge of the community. So that's where we're going with that, okay? Just to give you a sense. Transparency, anytime you see us in the field, you know what, I always tell people, we're working for the community, it's your information, your history. You see me in the field, pull over, ask, say, hey, Francesco, how's it going? What are you guys working on? You know, unless I don't know you, you know, I might give you a vague answer, and I don't do that on purpose. It's because I'm always careful of what we're sharing with people. And so, and if ever you want to organize a site visit, people from the Longhouse want to come and see that site, not a problem. It's never been a problem. And I want to stress that we really try and be transparent in terms of our work. We don't share sensitive stuff, at least not initially, because obviously, you know, social media just takes off sometimes without us giving us a proper chance. We're also very careful about sharing online, especially when we're working on projects. Not because we don't want to, because, and I tell my field crew all the time, I go, you post a picture with a GPS location. When we're gone in the evening or on the weekends, guess what? People are going to show up. And there's nothing worse than us doing all that work, taking them down 10 centimeters at a time, and then what we call pot hunters showing up in the middle of the night and then taking away some of our finds. And so that's the only reason. So we do it for pot hunters and we do it for safety. As I'm sure a lot of you are aware, the Guinadillo building was taken down because, of course, it had asbestos, lead paint. And so there was on Facebook somebody asking, do you have old pictures of the building? Well, people misinterpreted that. People said, oh, you need pictures of the building. And they went to the building, into a dangerous building to take photos. So another reason we don't always share information is for safety. We don't want people running into places where they shouldn't be. In terms of transparency, we're finally starting up, and that's why I said it's so unfortunate, talk about timing, that I'm presenting to you after the fact and not before. The return of these general meetings. You know, 2 weeks ago I finally had, with the new chiefs that got elected, a chance to present to them some of our findings of what we've been doing. MCA is getting ready, and of course we've done this in the past at the Longhouse. I've actually presented, but it's been way too long. And so we need to come up with an annual plan at least. If you want to do more than once a year, I'm easy, not a problem for me, okay? And it would be nice to sort of give everybody a heads up as to what we've been working on and what may be coming. I don't always know what's coming, just like this cemetery. It was one of those things was the last minute, hey, we need somebody to double check. And that happens a lot, more than it should. But we do our best, okay? We do have one other public meeting coming up at they call it the CSB, you know, but I still call it the old IGA. And that one is all our finds on. We're talking about the Solomon property. So Solomon, at one time, also had the property of where the library and the cemetery is. And we looked at those records, and for whatever reason, the cemetery wasn't marked. And so one of the things we want to do with all of these cemeteries is make sure that they're marked so that whoever the next person, next owner is aware from the beginning, not something they find out as they go, okay, because that's problematic. I know some of you are thinking, well, this is an archaeologist, he becomes insensitive to burials because that's what he does for a living. And I always remind people that I'm an archaeologist, but I'm also a father. And one of the things that we don't talk about is something that we have 80% in common, regardless of our cultures and our beliefs. And that is, of course, things like miscarriage and early child deaths. So if you go to my backyard and have a pine tree, and at the time, my wife and I thought, man, how could this happen to us? And then as we started speaking to family members, we then realized a lot of people go through this. And what do? Everyone comes up with their own plan. And so, when I do surveys, the one thing I've been doing this for 40 years, I love what I do, by the way. You'll know this by the time I'm done with this presentation. I love what I do, but there's one thing that I don't enjoy, is having to ask that question. When we do a water line, we're on a property, I say, hey, any family members buried in the backyard? I kind of bring it up gently. It's hard for them. It's a reminder to me. And And it's a discussion that needs to be had because, when we talk about children's cemeteries, like the one on St. Regis Road, there's no sign. It's understood that that's where a lot of children get buried. But those mothers, those families need a place. And that's, I think, long-term part of that solution. Because a lot of people don't know what to do. And so what often ends up happening in scenarios like what we're about to see. Anyway, I just wanted to share that with you, that it's always in the back of my mind whenever we're conducting these kind of surveys. Today, this is going to be our focus. After I'm done, if you want to ask any other archaeology questions, great, but I want to make sure this is our focus. And the reason is I don't want people leaving here that the questions weren't answered or they feel, well, we didn't get enough information. So I want to make sure that everyone feels that. And again, if you have any other questions, I'll stick around. I love talking about archaeology. We can talk about it all day long. So one of our issues, the cemeteries here at Akwesasne, is the following. Some of them are registered officially, and some of them are not. Many are not. Many of them we just don't know, or we have very, very, very little information. So I count on people in the community who give me little bits and pieces, and then I go into the archives, into the old survey maps. Survey maps, some of them, depending on who the surveyor was, can be incredible. We're talking about the Garrows. We did a survey of the Garrow property, and you know what? The surveyor included not only where the butternut trees were located, but he actually had the size of the butternut trees, 2 feet, 2.5 feet wide, all important information that we can use. Why they don't plot the cemeteries is a bit of a mystery, but it's an issue. Location and proximity is another problem, and I know that's the issue here, is how close can you build to these cemeteries? Well, when you look at the history in the community, you got houses that are right next to cemeteries. At St. Regis Point, there are homes where, if you ask me, I think they're on top of the cemetery. A lot of you are probably aware of the parking lot at the church. You have 2 mass graves underneath that parking lot. I know what people are going to say, or feel, well, we shouldn't be parking there anymore. And you know what? Nobody would argue that. The only problem is, where do you park? If you've ever been at a function at that church, there is no place to park on a busy day. And so if we say, well, let's move it over somewhere else, you know what the problem is? More archaeological sites. And that has become the issue in this community. So it's easy to say, oh yeah, we shouldn't be parking there anymore. And I can tell you from the surveys we've done, preliminary surveys, is that we could move that parking lot to the closest large space without disturbing another archaeological site is around the post office where they added that new parking lot. And we did that in the middle of the winter, okay? So that's a big problem, this thing about where they're located. Look at the Mohawk School off of Church Street. There too, one of their extensions right onto a cemetery. So this thing about how close, I'll show you a detailed map of that, but it is an issue. It's a real issue. Okay. So it's something that we're slowly going to work on. The current tipple is Darren Bonaparte. He was the one who, when this came up, had said to me, we really need to look at that cemetery. He believed, and he remembered as a child, just as Ms. White pointed out, that there were several people buried there. This is not a one individual that eventually became 2. He thought that there must be at least about, anywhere from 6 to a dozen individuals. I said to him, you know what, let me look into it. It's Justin Creed and the rest of the board members, they were under the impression that there were only 2. And I said to Justin, I said, well, listen, if you want, why don't we do a survey once and for all? Let's do it properly. Because if not, then this mystery will continue forever. People will always wonder, and if we do a proper survey, at least you can answer that question. And find the perimeter around where it is a cemetery. Because right now, there's no perimeter. And I'm sure if ever you go by Route 37, you got those picnic tables that move around. You got vendors that are sometimes on the cemetery. And so let's find a perimeter. let's figure out if this whole thing is a cemetery. And they were shocked, and I said to them, I'm going to do it pro bono, because I believe in the library ever since I had met Sue when I first started. So I did this work for free. I'm here today for free. Just so you know, I don't have anything invested. Even though I do consulting work for the community, but there's some projects I take personally, and I want to make sure that we're doing the right thing, okay? So everybody agreed, so there's no disagreement here. I know online people are saying, but I can tell you one thing, Darren was all for it, and even Justin said, if this does turn out to be a full cemetery, we're going to have to abandon the project, People say, why don't you move it to the side? Well, there's an archaeological site on the side. Why don't you move it to the back? There's stuff in the back too. It's become a real challenge for us. And as long as we're given enough time, we can find a solution to kind of, find a spot. But it's not easy. One of the problems with Route 37 is it's always been an archaeological site. Today it's Route 37. But if we go back 100, 150 years ago, it was a military turnpike, moving people to get over to Plattsburgh. But before that, where do you think they got the idea from? It was a native trail. It's always been. In fact, we find a lot of sites along Route 37, in addition to the cemetery. As far as 5,000 years ago, what we call the Archaic period. So we have found projectile points that go back 5,000 years along this Route 37. So it's not just recent stuff, we have a lot of material there as well to cover. And of course, what about archaeological assessments along the rest of Route 37? With all those pot shops that have gone up, guess what? Have any of them done any archaeology? I think you know the answer to the question. No one has, unfortunately. And so that's a challenge. Now, the library was really good about it. They said, you know what, let's do it properly, and they gave us the go-ahead to at least do it. But however, I pointed out to everybody, because of what we know, we got to do two things, not one. Is one, find this perimeter of the cemetery. That's goal number one. Figure out where it goes. And then the other one, of course, is you got to make sure, my concern was that it's not just a current family plot, but there may be pre-contact material there as well. And the reason for that is people tend to bury where there are already burials. And so if somebody noticed that there were already burials there before, we might have stuff that's even more than 500 years ago as well, okay? So those are kind of our two goals, is that, no, we're not just gonna do, figure out where this is. We also gotta double check to make sure that there's no other archaeological materials in front of that library, okay? We had already done a lot of work in the area. It's one of the reasons we were able to narrow it down quickly. A lot of people don't realize this. Presentation in 2 weeks is we've been working on the Solomon property. We had already done over 900 shovel tests, imagine, manually, over 56 large one-by-ones, and we also tested the ground penetrating radar in that area. Now, I know that you hear a lot about this in the news these days, especially with the missing children. I love technology. I'm one of those, the latest, I want it. I want to always connect with different universities, which is what we've been doing, to get them to come here and test their newest equipment, because they're getting better and better. However, in soils that are very rocky, the next time you're at the library, you drive down Library Road near where you have the daycare, for instance, all the way to the Solomon Orchard, the apples. What you'll see is that it becomes very stony, large boulders, okay? And then after that, you get into sand. So ground penetrating radar, your sandy areas, perfect. In these stony areas, you get a lot of false positives. And that's a problem. And it's become a problem even with this whole scenario where we're trying to relocate a lot of those missing children. And the reason it's a problem is there was one group out west, again, these archaeologists were trying to be, a little, let's help the Indians kind of thing. And I think they meant well. However, when you say, oh, we hit 2,000 positives, and then they go back and they test them, Because the only way to test is to excavate, which you don't want to do. But remember, there's nothing that beats excavation. Regardless of what all these things do and tell you, they guide you, but they're never perfect. Okay? So they had 2,000 positives, they did their testing, and actual excavations, 0. And of course, the problem with that is, it's not just that the archaeology community looks bad, but the communities feel bad. It's like, hey, we've been misled. And then the worst part is you then have I call them the Holocaust deniers that come out, who say, oh, but no children have ever been buried. Because now they say, well, you see, you guys have been testing, you haven't found anything. And so we always have to be careful that whatever information we provide that we're accurate, so that it doesn't take away from the main story. And and I find that frustrating as hell, as you can imagine. But we're trying to be careful, and that's why we were very, very careful with this in terms of our methodology. Okay? So if any ground penetrating radar was going to be a problem. Okay, oops. Let's go back here. So we have this debate about ground penetrating radar and whether we use a magnetometer. Don't let the name fool you. Okay. Some of the new equipment is pretty impressive. So a couple of things in terms of strategy. The image looks a bit angled, and what it is it's actually facing north. Route 37 is off a little bit, so we went off of the road, and you'll see even the building is off in that angle. So it's either the original lot was angled a little bit and was just off by a tad, and so we decided to go with the road just to be consistent with our survey. Because of our experience at St. Regis Church, where we know that people are buried underneath the asphalt, okay, which is tragic, we decided not only are we going to survey this grass area, I was very insistent, and again, there was no opposition from Darren or even from Justin. Everyone agreed, let's test all the area, including this road here. The only thing we're going to do is Route 37 because it's dangerous. And so we also factored that into our survey. So we just didn't do the grass, we decided to extend further out. The magnetometer, the reason we use it is to see if soil has ever been misplaced. It's perfect for that. The ground penetrating radar would have given us a lot of false positives, and in a place like this you'd get like 100. And so it's wrong to say there are 100 people buried there, when the oral history gives us about 10 or a dozen or so. Okay? The magnetometer, what's really nice is that it detects wherever there's a drop off, a change in the soil, whether it's large or small. And that's what you want, because when people are buried, they're buried deep, sometimes only 2-3 feet, but a lot of times 5 or more. Okay? The next time you stand at the library here, and this was one of the concerns I had, I looked at this feature, and it was hard to tell is it a sandy knoll or is it fill? If it was fill, this would be very problematic. Even our equipment wouldn't have caught anything. And the reason I say this is when you look at this property here, which is not owned by the library, by the way, it's maintained. It has a bit of an L shape, okay? And then over here, it looks like this was all pushed over. At least it was one of my concerns. Fill is never good. The only way you can get an answer is by actually doing archaeology, which nobody wants, okay? So what we did discover is this is a natural sandy knoll, a glacial knoll that was pushed. And usually what ends up happening is you get sand, and you also get boulders as well. And it seems like the sandy part is where people are buried, and then you have your boulders over on this side, okay? Which is typical. You know what, when you want a location for a family plot, you want something that's sandy, so it's easy to dig, but it's also something that drains well. So the choice was very logical. The fact that this was, or at least it was a church in the vicinity, the original building, would make sense as well in terms of location. And so, again, the choice makes sense, but it is a natural feature. Okay, and And we have a couple of these along Route 37. The next time you're on Cornwall Island, you'll notice there's a lot of ups and downs. We call those drumlins. That's what that is. It's the glaciers that have pushed. So this is a natural feature. What's good about a natural feature is the soils will come out very, very clear. If anybody was buried there, you will pick it up. You will pick it up with any equipment, you'll pick it up with an excavation, which is not necessary, but if you had to, remember that's always your best tool. Okay? So our survey, the magnetometers, you've seen them, you see people finding utilities. Here we were experimenting, we did it without the vehicles in the way, and again, the property line is actually, that's the only reason we cut it short, but you can tell where it seems to go up, and we were concerned that maybe it's not natural, but it is. We've proven that this is all natural, okay? And clean, there's no fill. That's the other thing that's very important. When we do surveys, we always find, like, bottles, you name it, it's all there. This property is really, really clean, even though there's been all kinds of activities on the surface, but the moment you test below the sod, this is clean material, okay? So you can be rest assured of that. So we did a very tight grid to sort of get a sense of what we're looking for. So this is what we came up with, and these are actually just a bit larger so you can see them. This is the design for where they're setting up. And this is where they put the cement platform. So we definitely have 6 bolts, and then we have an area at the bottom that we think are probably 2 children, and then about 3, maybe 4, much smaller. What I like about this is it gives you, it matches the stories that we've been hearing. They came out very clear. Not only did they come out very clear, they're very systematic. They're exactly 5 feet apart. Okay? The ones in red are the ones that you see. So if you were to go out there, this is the Phillips, this is the Lorraine. The ones in red. The ones in yellow are what we think are below the surface. And these, we think that the headstone is lying flat immediately below the sod. Okay? We don't have to excavate if ever they wanted to. There's that possibility. This part is harder to read because they're smaller and for children. And again, with the magnetometer, we're not looking, the goal is not whether or not they were buried in casket or just wrapped in leather. That's not the objective here. It's to see if soil has been displaced. The rest of the property was very clean. There was no soil that has ever been displaced, with the exception of the middle area here. If you remember the late Jake Swamp, Jake used to go around planting his white pines of peace, and I didn't realize this. One of Jake's trees was here and was uprooted, but I guess the way they pulled it out, they really left a big dent in this area. So that's the only area where the soil was displaced, and of course boulders there as well. So that's kind of it in terms of our breakdown. My biggest concern, I have a question, yes? This is right here. Yeah, right here. Right here. Oh, that's a vehicle. That's a vehicle. On this side. Yeah. Yeah, there's